and published privately by the officers and directors of the Meteorological Research and Publication Company of St. Louis, Missouri in 1875. For half a century, scientists have earnestly been laboring to discover a cycle in the cataclysms, but without success. Yet, every day, the necessity for it becomes more evident, and the demand for it more earnest and pressing. Professor Lockyer, an English astronomer and renowned as a spectroscopist, expresses himself upon this subject as follows. In meteorology, as in astronomy, the thing to hunt down is a cycle, and if it is not to be found in the temperate zones, then go to the frigid zones or to the torrid zones to look for it. If found, then above all things, and in whatever manner, lay hold of it, study it, record it, and see what happens. Observations on special phenomena, such as sunspots, solar physics, generally magnetic intensity in the earth, electric tension, both of the earth and of the atmosphere, auroras, earthquakes, cyclones, rainfalls, and terrestrial temperatures, have been made for a half-century, and some for nearly 2 centuries. Why these observations have not been more fruitful and valuable results is owing to the fact that each observer worked independently and made the observations of his chosen phenomena a specialty, without ever dreaming that there was a correlation between all physical phenomena. No islands in space. After devoting a period to their work equal to half the length of what the psalmist assigns as the term of human life, each observer came to the conclusion that his special phenomena had a periodicity and repeated itself in a cycle between 10 and 12 years. After having satisfied myself of the existence of meteorological cycles, about 8 years ago, I undertook to investigate their cause, with a view of determining their length, as nothing can exist without a cause. Synchronous and covariant phenomena, regularly repeating themselves in cycles of uniform length, must have a permanent cause that is common to them all, and whatever that may be, and whosoever located it, must be ascertainable and susceptible of proof. In the preceding part of this work, I have demonstrated that winds, rain, snow, and hailstorms, cyclones, auroras, earthquakes, in fine, all telluric and atmospheric phenomena are electric. Bam! At that time I didn't make it up. He wrote it. And that, under what may be considered the normal condition of the earth and the atmosphere, the electricity necessary to their production is constantly being generated, but with varying energy. I knew the sun was a variable star too, and it got its power variably. A testimony of the facts presented incontestably establishes 3 points: that earthquakes have a periodicity in the frequency of their occurrence, and that they show well-defined periods of maxims and minima, which alternate regularly as to time with each other. Examinations of the dates of their occurrences show that these maxima and minima are covariants with those of other physical disturbances. Earthquakes are caused by disruptive discharges of electricity through the strata of the earth. Electric currents at all times are circulating through the earth from east to west. In times of physical perturbations, indicated by sunspots, auroras, and great oscillations in the magnetic needle, earth currents, as they are called, often become too intense to be transmitted through the strata of the earth, unless where the strata are unbroken or of good conductive capacity. These currents, where the strata are broken up or of too feeble conductive capacity, become dammed up, as it were, until they are strong enough to force a passage which is affected by what is called a disruptive discharge. I'll be danged. He knew that and just kind of like, I'll just put that in my pocket. No, I'm not going to tell anyone. I thought that was amazing when I read that. Chapter 3, Mysterious Forces of the Universe. In order to understand some of the mighty changes that took place in the surface of the earth in ages gone by, I believe it well to present here, in very brief form, a panoramic picture or description of what occurred in the past 200,000 years. That's kind of a coincidence that he came up with that figure. I will not take the time nor space to quote authors or records for the statements made in this chapter, but will refer to these in a separate part of the book. Suffice it to say that where archaeological and geological records do not give some of these facts, ancient writings, carvings, and engravings on stone supply the deficiencies in an undisputable manner. Beginning then at the earliest period of which we have any definite knowledge, we find that 200,000 years ago the surface of the earth was very much like that pictured in map number 1. The large dark portions shown on this map constitute one unbroken continent reaching from the 20th degree of eastern longitude to the 80th degree of western longitude, and occupying a large population of the present Pacific Ocean and lapping over into Asia and Africa. This continent was the only habitable land sufficiently above water to have any considerable degree of vegetation. The shaded portion shown on the map, which represents the ancient continent of North and South America and present continents of Asia and Africa, was either wholly submerged beneath the water or it was a form of swamp land known to the inhabitants of the continent of Lemuria, but not available for habitations of any kind. At least 150,000 years ago, these partially submerged lands were known and described and sometimes pictured in maps, from which the map shown herewith has been taken. But for many thousands of years, these swampy lands were unpopulated and considered as barren and useless. There must have been parts of this swampy land that were higher than others, and from some indications we find that those portions shaded a little darker than the others on the map were known as highlands, but still of little value. On the one continent shown in black on the map, all human civilization began, and probably here too was the beginning of all creatures that lived out of or above the waters of the earth. This ancient continent, which is now called Lemuria, but which had other names in the times that are past, was truly the cradle of the human race and the original Garden of Eden. If we look upon the ancient traditional story of the creation of man as symbolical of the actual facts, in all ancient records and among all tribes of people, there is a trace of this time, this same old story of the creation of man in a Garden of Eden. And like many others in the Old Testament of the present-day Bible, these symbolical traditional stories are evidences of great truths passed down from generation to generation of the human race. For 100,000 years or more, the cradle of civilization on the ancient continent of Lemuria rocked the newly born of many tribes which descended from the earliest created beings. And it may be said in passing that the earliest records indicate that man was created coincident with the creation of other living creatures, and that he was not a descendant from any lower species of animal kingdom, but always of human form and expression, and with dominant control over the other creatures around him. Thus, the old biblical story representing the ancient traditions of the history of man appear to be correct, and indicate that God created man immediately after having created the other creatures over whom he has to have dominion. Just about 100,000 years ago, great changes began to take place on the surface and below the surface of the lands and the waters of this earth. I shall not take time to speak of the facts about the gas belts volcanoes, and other causes of earthquakes, tremblers, and shocks, which periodically affected the surface of the earth in such a definite manner as to make it evident that the earth was passing through a regular and continuous program of evolutionary changes. For the science of archaeology and geology are replete with traditions and interesting descriptions of the causes and nature of such periodic changes. Suffice it to say, in this regard, that these changes appear to have been cyclic, see Appendix 1, and to have moved in waves like magnetic waves from the east toward the west, and each have covered a narrow band of the Earth's surface, much like the bands of longitude shown on the maps herewith. These bands were evidently about 40 to 80 degrees of longitude in width and extended from the north to the south poles. They were truly magnetic in effect, for their results are incredibly recorded in the matter and elements that compose the hard and dry substances of the Earth's surface, and show that great heat of an electric and magnetic nature often instantaneously reduced the hardest materials to molten. Sometimes such changes occurred in two opposite parts of the Earth's surface at the same time, but the changes were in progressive steps across the surface of the Earth from east to west. Our continents, as we know them today, therefore have grown to what they are through the many changes, and they are continuing to grow and to change. Coastlines of all continents are varying from century to century, and new islands rise and disappear in various parts of the world. Mountains have changed their height, valleys have been raised and lowered, seas have come and disappeared, and even climatic conditions have changed in the Western world, as well as in the Eastern. It is interesting to note that in the process of the development and growth of the continents on the surface of this earth, that all lands began as swampy marshes, and either raised slowly in parts or were left higher through the waters receding in a gradual manner, or were pushed upwards in places by sudden submarine or other explosions. But practically all of the continents in their early stages were more or less level, and high mountains were entirely unknown, for mountains are a very recent addition to all continents. 100,000 years ago, when the present European and adjoining continental lands were beginning to be higher and drier, there were a few places that might be called hills and absolutely no mountains at all. Even Lemuria, the oldest of the continents, and the one which was
at this time well populated and thickly covered with vegetation, had little or no hills and absolutely no mountains.
About 82,000 years ago, the first of the definitely recorded series of magnetic waves began to move once more around the Earth's circle from east to west. The ones which had preceded these by several 100,000 years are not definitely recorded, but those which began about 82,000 years ago affected civilization to such an extent and made such important changes that took place is that shown on the map, number 2, first, beginning at about 140 degrees eastern longitude. The part of the continent of Lemuria that was connected with Asia and Africa began to sink slightly, enough to be broken up into swampy islands. Other parts of it submerged, leaving the continent of Lemuria, a much smaller continent located entirely in the Pacific Ocean, and contacting some of the present-day islands near the shore of Asia, as the magnetic waves and degree of changes passed east. Well, that's good. I'm still amazed. This guy just knew, like a matter-of-factly, that the universe was electric and, didn't make a big deal out of it. That's the way it appeared to me now. I don't know. But maybe he just didn't get where I know he would have been. Like, what are they doing? Stuff like that. The European continent shaded in a manner to separate them. The large black portion forming the one entire continent from the north to the south and reaching from about 20 degrees eastern longitude to 130 degrees western longitude is the land that was destined to become North and South America. This great continent, shown in black, rose very high and rapidly became covered with heavy vegetation, while the rest of Europe, shown in shaded lines, and all of Africa remained desert land, with most of Asia still swampy land. Africa's falling apart. It's supposed to be, and it is breaking up. Right at the bottom, or is it the top? I'd have to see a map. I forget. It's been a while, but they say that Africa's going to break up into 3 land masses. It's already in the process. It's been in the process. That's pretty crazy. Not that long ago, I was watching one of those viral videos. Sometimes I like to watch, epic fails. And the one guy, the Impossible Channel, he's pretty good. Anyways, on one of them, a big group of trees just being swallowed by waterland. Rivers were formed in the lowest of the sections of the lands, and as magnetic waves continued further eastward, large rivers were formed, which separated or divided parts of Europe into several continents. Map number 2 shows the European continents shaded in a manner to separate them. The large black portion forming one entire continent from the north to the south and reaching from about 20 degrees eastern longitude to 130 degrees western longitude is the land that was destined to become North and South America. The great continent, shown in black, rose very high. And rapidly became covered with heavy vegetation, while the rest of Europe froze its balls off, shown in shaded lines. And all of Africa remained desert land, with most of Asia. It looks like a buffalo. Now that's a buffalo. People of Lemuria now began to colonize. And the records indicate that about 80,000 years ago, they began to make pilgrimages to other lands, sending sufficient numbers in each pilgrimage to constitute a colony or community. The first experiments of this kind were directed toward Asia, but many pilgrimages were made both easterly and westerly. The Chinese had these huge ships in pre-Diluvian times. That's where the junk was fashioned from. About 75,000 years ago, the continent in black, shown on the map, number 2, began to drift and to separate itself from the rest of Europe and Africa. To those who may wonder whether it is possible for a continent to drift or not, let me say that there are many and sufficient proofs in science of archaeology and geology to show that this is possible. Not all land on the surface of the earth is part of a submarine floor or body of the earth. Yeah, and you're just going to get the grease in the frying pan demonstration. Even when continents are attached to the body of the earth, these continents can be moved and have moved through the changes in the surface of the earth, caused by earthquakes and cataclysms of various kinds. And the earthquakes and cataclysms are brought on by the outside force, extraterrestrial. It appears from a careful study of the nature of the earth as a sphere that must be internal regions of great space filled with great heat and gases. It is apparent that in some of the cataclysms that have taken place, land has been swallowed up by vast internal spaces of the earth, as well as having submerged just beneath the surface of the water for all of the continents that have disappeared. Well, I forgot what I was going to say is I saw trees literally just sink right underneath the water. There were solid trees, the roots just down they went down. It was crazy. It's on one of them videos. I'm going to get it and show it. All the islands that have been lowered beneath the surface of the water are not discoverable through deep-sea exploration. As I shall point out later, the sinking of these continents has caused a lowering of the level of the ocean's surface. The sinking of a continent just beneath the surface of the ocean would not cause the waters to materially drop in their height, inasmuch as the displacement of water by the sinking of the continent would make up for the absence of the continent in the surface of the water. Some continents, however, and many islands, have been drawn completely into the very bowels of the earth and have not displaced any of the water at all. The Acambaro figures. Most mainstream paleontologists and geologists place dinosaurs on Earth's timeline at around 220 million to 65 million years ago, during the Mesozoic era. Homo sapiens do not appear in the traditional anthropological record until about 200,000 years ago, during the Middle Pleistocene Age, Middle Paleolithic Age, or Middle Stone Age in Africa. There is, however, evidence that dinosaurs and humans may have coexisted for a time. If they are real, the Acambaro figures are an example. We can find mystery and romance at Laddle volume. In the first place, nighttime, sinuses, boom. And how it came to be applied to this western land. We know that most, if not all, of the other names used in the state, and which are foreign to the American language, were copied from European languages, mostly Spanish, and the padres and the missionaries. But the name California has no definite meaning in any European language and is quite a unique name in itself. It was Reverend Edward Everett Hay who discovered in 1862 a due to the origin of the name California and how it came to be applied to this western land. I'm on full retard tonight. That was California, not Lemuria. It was almost finished anyway. I'll just go back to the one that was playing before. When it rains, it pours. Alright, where was that one? Was the figurines, right? Yes. Okay, yeah, I'll play those. The Acambaro figures. Most mainstream paleontologists and geologists place dinosaurs on Earth's timeline at around 220 million to 65 million years ago, during the Mesozoic era. Homo sapiens do not appear in the traditional anthropological record until about 200,000 years ago, during the Middle Pleistocene Age, Middle Paleolithic Age, or Middle Stone Age in Africa. There is, however, evidence that dinosaurs and humans may have coexisted for a time. If they are real, the Acambaro figures are an example of this phenomenon. This sculpture shows a man riding a triceratops. They depict dinosaurs and humans living together. The Acambaro figures are about 33,000 small ceramic figurines, allegedly found by Waldemar Jelsred in July 1944 in the Mexican city of Acambaro, Guanajuato. The figurines are said by some to resemble dinosaurs and are sometimes cited as anachronisms. The Acambaro figures are about 33,000 small ceramic figurines. Some young Earth creationists have adduced the existence of figurines as credible evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and humans, attempt to cast doubt on modern scientific dating methods, and potentially offer support for a literal interpretation of the Genesis creation narrative. However, there is no known reliable evidence for the validity of the Acambaro figures as actual ancient artifacts. Many have questioned the motives of those who argue for their validity. They were uncovered by a German immigrant and hardware merchant named Waldemar Jelsred, according to Dennis Swift, a young Earth creationist, major proponent of the figures. Jelsred stumbled upon the figures while riding his horse and hired a local farmer to dig up the remaining figures, paying him for each figure he brought back. Eventually, the farmer, and his assistants brought him over 32,000 figures, which included representations of everything from the supposed dinosaur to peoples from all over the world, including Egyptians, Sumerians, and bearded Caucasians. Archaeologist Charles Di Pezzo was working for the Amerind Foundation, an anthropological organization dedicated to preserving Native American culture. Di Pezzo examined the figures and determined that they were not authentic and had instead been produced by local modern-day farmers. He concluded that the figurines were indeed fakes. Their surfaces displayed no signs of age, no dirt was packed into their crevices, and though some figurines were broken, no pieces were missing, no broken surfaces were worn. Excavations stratigraphy clearly showed that the artifacts were placed in a recent dug hole filled with a mixture of the surrounding archaeological layers. Di Pezzo also learned that a local family had been making and selling these figurines to Gelsrud for £1 apiece since 1944, presumably inspired by films shown at Ecambaro Cinema. Locally available comic books and newspapers, and accessible day trips to Mexico City's Museo Nacional. Eventually, the farmer and his assistants brought him over 32,000 figures, which included representations of everything from the supposed dinosaurs to peoples from all over the world. Charles Hapgood, pioneer of the pole shift theory, became one of the figure's most high-profile and devout supporters. The figures continue to draw attention in the present day. They have been cited in some pseudoscientific books, such as Atlantis Rising by David Lewis. Another young Earth creationist, Don Patton, has emerged as one of their staunchest supporters. He has proposed some new lines of evidence, including the figure's resemblance to the dinosaurs depicted in Robert Baker's book, Dinosaur Heresies. In 1970, Earl Stanley Gardner published his last travel book, Host with the Big Hat, with a chapter on the collection. His biographer, Dorothy B. Hughes, wrote, "The story of Ecambaro may be the crowning achievement of his archaeological investigations. Attempts have been made to date the figures using thermoluminescence TL dating. The earliest results from tests done when TL dating was in its infancy suggested a date around 2500 BC. However, later tests contradicted these findings. In 1976, Gary W. Caraveau and Mark C. Hann attempted to date 20 Ecambaro figures using TL dating. They found that the figures had been fired at temperatures between 450 Celsius and 650 Celsius, which contradicted claims that these figures had been fired at temperatures too low for them to be accurately dated. However, all of the samples failed the plateau test, which indicated that dates obtained for the Ecambaro figures using standard high-temperature TL dating techniques were unreliable and lacked any chronological significance, based on the degree of signal regeneration found in remeasured samples. They estimated that the figures tested had been fired approximately 30 years prior to 1969. Close encounters of the starry kind. Red dwarf passed within 0.8 light years of our solar system. Now that's getting pretty close to what we're talking about. Shoal's star was discovered in 2014 but appeared to have an odd motion. Astronomers traced its path through the sky and found it was moving away. They found it came closer than any known star 70,000 years ago. It passed so close that it passed through the outer Oort cloud, which is a theory of comets. Our current nearest star is Proxima Centauri, around 4.2 light years away. It's another red dwarf. The Shoal star came 5 times closer, but is now 20 light years away. Our solar system had a close encounter with another star 70,000 years ago, research has revealed. So we're not that far off after all. The recently discovered star passed just 0.8 light years away. They're not really given much else on it. Astronomers discovered the star's flyby by tracing its movement through the sky and found it would have passed within the outer Oort cloud of comets. Dr. Eric Mamajek, an astronomer at the University of Rochester who led the study, said that it is unlikely the star would have caused much disturbance to the scattered icy comets that orbit the outermost reaches of the solar system. However, he said it raised the possibility that other close encounters with stars in the future could have far greater impact. He said, using that, I like the way they use the word impact. They want to make you think of it crashing into us. He said, using the best available astrometry, our simulations suggest the probability that the star penetrated the outer Oort cloud is 98%. While the flyby of this system likely caused negligible impact on the flux of long-period comets, the recent discovery of this binary highlights the dynamically important Oort cloud perturbers may be lurking among nearby stars. Schultz star was first discovered in 2014 by Rafe Dieter Schultz. Of course, I know nothing. I see nothing. But unlike other stars around it, it appeared to have an unusual motion in the sky. A team of scientists from the U.S., Europe, Chile, and South Africa used observations of its motion to trace back its trajectory. They found that the star is moving away from the Earth at great speed and came alarmingly close 70,000 years ago. They calculated that the star, which also has the catchy name WISE J0720003.20084651.2, passed 5 trillion miles away from our sun, 0.8 light years away. So that'd be a load of dust 0.8 miles from the sun. I don't think it would have much of an effect. But seeing that they're saying that it can get that close, it's not far off from one entering the sun's heliosphere. This close, it would have been impossible to see the star from Earth with the naked eye. It was far too dim. Scientists believe it is an active red dwarf that is about 8% the mass of our own sun. It is part of a binary system and is accompanied by a brown dwarf, a failed star that was too small to spark life, even when at its closest to Earth. Schultz star should have been 50 times fainter than what can be normally seen with the naked eye. Instead, the star would have been visible with a telescope, technology far beyond our ancestors 70,000 years ago. Says them. However, the star may have occasionally flared and become brighter for a few minutes. For any of our ancestors who glanced upwards during such a flare, they would have seen it in an area around the Big Dipper. Astronomers who work published in the Journal of Astrophysics Journal Letters calculated that Schultz star's path would have taken it through the outer areas of the Oort cloud. And they have a little diagram of the hypothesized Oort cloud. This is where they believe long-period comets come from, and short-period. The Keenan-Barger Cowie KBC void, named after the Wisconsin astronomers Keenan, Barger, and Lennox Cowie, is thought to be one of many. There is no emptiness in the electric universe. According to a recent press release, astronomers are puzzled by the extent, as well as its lack of galaxies in what is deemed the largest void yet discovered. The void is approximately 2 billion light-years in diameter, as astronomers measure distance, and it's within that cosmic bubble that the Milky Way galaxy is said to reside. The problem is, such a structure should not exist. The Keenan-Barger-Cowie KBC void contains far too little matter for its size. The universe is theorized to be a certain age, as the scientific consensus thinks all matter and all energy came into being during the Big Bang. Based on its theoretical expansion rate, the universe should create various formations for time. The problem with the empty regions, like the KBC, is that gravity has not had enough time to pull matter into bounded bubbles with empty centers. About 15 years ago, astronomers discovered that remote galaxies seem to indicate the universe is expanding faster today than it did in the past. Such anomalous redshift observations threaten Big Bang cosmology. So the existence of negative pressure on gravitational fields was proposed. Negative gravity ideas flew in the face of most theories, so the accelerated expansion was later amended to dark energy. Because it cannot be detected with any instrument, only inferred. Instead of accepting that observational anomalies exist because the Big Bang theory is faulty, astronomers resort to theoretical addenda, such as the questionable idea that space can be pulled, twisted, or stretched. In a previous picture of the day, astrophysicists from the University of California were quoted as saying, "The universe is made mostly of dark matter and dark energy, and we don't know what either of them is." From the perspective of electric universe theory, it is electricity that drives galaxies and their associated stars. Laboratory experiments confirmed that Birkeland current filaments form structures that resemble spiral galaxies. Birkeland currents have a longer range attractive force than gravity by several orders of magnitude, diminishing with the square root of the distance from their current axis. That powerful electromagnetic attraction could also account for the movement of stars near the Milky Way's core, as well as the acceleration of galaxies in deep space. Birkeland currents are the strongest long-range attractors in the universe. A physicist and electric universe pioneer, Hans Alfvén, said, "I have never thought that you could obtain the extremely clumpy, heterogeneous universe we have today, strongly affected by plasma processes, from the smooth, homogeneous one of the Big Bang, dominated by gravitation." From A. L. Peratt, Dean of the Plasma Dissidents, Washington Times, Supplement The World and I, May 1988. Stephen Smith. The Keenan-Barger Cowie KBC void, named after the Wisconsin astronomers Keenan, Barger, and Lennox Cowie, is thought to be one of many voids. The Keenan-Barger. There is the Keenan-Barger Cowie, one of many voids. The Keenan-Barger. There is no emptiness in the electric universe. According to a recent press release, astronomers are puzzled by the extent, as well as its lack of galaxies in what is deemed the largest void yet discovered. The void is approximately 2 billion light-years in diameter, as astronomers measure distance, and it's within that cosmic bubble that the Milky Way galaxy is said to reside. The problem is, such a structure should not exist. The Keenan-Barger-Cowie KBC void contains far too little matter for its size. The universe is theorized to be a certain age. As the scientific consensus thinks, all matter and all energy came into being during the Big Bang. Based on its theoretical expansion rate, the universe should create various formations for time. The problem with the empty regions, like the KBC, is that gravity has not had enough time to pull matter into bounded bubbles with empty centers. About 15 years ago, astronomers discovered that remote galaxies seem to indicate the universe is expanding faster today than it did in the past. Such anomalous redshift observations threaten Big Bang cosmology. So the existence of negative pressure on gravitational fields was proposed. Negative gravity ideas flew in the face of most theories, so the accelerated expansion was later amended to dark energy. Because it cannot be detected with any instrument, only inferred. Instead of accepting that observational anomalies exist because the Big Bang theory is faulty, astronomers resort to theoretical addenda, such as the questionable idea that space can be pulled, twisted, or stretched. In a previous picture of the day, astrophysicists from the University of California were quoted as saying, "The universe is made mostly of dark matter and dark energy, and we don't know what either of them is." From the perspective of electric universe theory, it is electricity that drives galaxies and their associated stars. Laboratory experiments confirmed that Birkeland current filaments form structures that resemble spiral galaxies. Birkeland currents have a longer range attractive force than gravity by several orders of magnitude, diminishing with the square root of the distance from their current axis. That powerful electromagnetic attraction could also account for the movement of stars near the Milky Way's core, as well as the acceleration of galaxies in deep space. Birkeland currents are the strongest long-range attractors in the universe. A physicist and electric universe pioneer, Hans Alfvén, said, "I have never thought that you could obtain the extremely clumpy, heterogeneous universe we have today, strongly affected by plasma processes, from the smooth, homogeneous one of the Big Bang, dominated by gravitation." From A. L. Peratt, Dean of the Plasma Dissidents, Washington Times, Supplement The World in the Eye, May 1988. Stephen Smith. This pulsar wind has created a highly magnetized bubble of high-energy particles called a pulsar wind nebula, seen as the blue region surrounding the pulsar. Well, I couldn't find any anything under APEP. I did get a hit or Wolf-Rayet stars, and it is spherical shells around stars are signs of electrical activity. More than 70 years ago, Dr. Charles Bruce noted that planetary nebulae are similar to electric discharges. He reasoned that their shapes were hourglasses, with central stars obscured by dusty toroids. Since nebular shapes are similar to the twisted filaments and spirals of electric discharges, they also appear as near spherical shapes. The recent press release states that a bubble-like structure is wrapped around Wolf-Rayet star SH2-308, or Easy Canis Majoris, in the constellation Canis Major. As the announcement says, ongoing radiation from the star pushes the bubble out further and farther, blowing it bigger and bigger, some 60 light-years apart. Electric discharges in plasma form double layers along their current axis. Positive charges build up on one side of the cloud, negative charges on the other. A powerful electric field develops between them, and if enough charge is applied, the double layer glows. Otherwise, it remains in dark mode and is invisible. In plasma, the electric charges spiral into filaments, which attract each other, sometimes pinching into arc mode discharges. As written many times, double layers can be pumped with energy from galactic Birkeland currents. Increased flux density draws matter from surrounding space into filaments, igniting nebular gases electrically. Could this be what is reported by the European Space Agency? Unfortunately, at this point in time, the only way to detect double layers in space is to send a spacecraft equipped with a Langmuir probe through them. Local experiments within the solar system detect double layers like those created in the laboratory. Such structures are known as magnetospheres, magnetotails, cometary nuclei, and comet tails. In 1981, Nobel laureate Hans L. Fane wrote, "It is unpleasant to base far-fetched conclusions on the existence of a structure which we cannot detect directly, but the alternative is to draw far-reaching conclusions from the assumption that in distant regions the plasmas have properties which are drastically different from what they are in our own neighborhood. This is obviously far more unpleasant. Filaments, braids, overlapping rings, stacked rings around the central star, hourglass shapes and coherent tubes of filaments are visible around SH2-308, and I'd probably say around APEP too. In an electric universe, it is not hot gas that flows through space. It is plasma. The physics of electricity apply, not the physics of wind. Inside the shells of planetary nebulae are more and more plasma sheaths that act like capacitors, alternately storing and releasing electric energy. Electric currents ebbs and flows inside and outside sheaths within the shells. The Hubble Space Telescope's image reveals many of plasma's fundamental glow mode characteristics. Since the central star's axis is a Z-pinch funnel, the cylinder of electric current appears to be a circle or bubble. Nebulae are stellar Z-pinches in a flow of electricity, so there is enough power to supply the radiation load of current of the central star. Stars, as written many times elsewhere, are powered by electricity coupled with nebular discharge currents rather than nuclear fusion. Since nebular currents cannot exist beyond their optical glows, they must be part of completed circuits that wind through the Milky Way. Stephen Smith. Yeah, buddy. Pretty much would say that that's the answer of what they're seeing around APEP, electric current, ionized electric plasma. That article leads into another one here. Capacitance, resistance, and induction power of the sun. Let's see what it has to say. What are stars? And by extension, what is the sun? Consensus opinions state that the sun is composed of elements formed in the Big Bang. Other elements created in dying stars, and elements formed in supernovae explosions. Primordial hydrogen and helium make up 98% of its overall mass. With a process of continuous creation in its core, thermonuclear fusion reactions are thought to produce heavier elements there. Heliophysicists think that the sun is a gravity engine, deriving all of its power from mechanical compression. Like a big piston engine. It is called thermonuclear fusion because massive thermal energies are thought to occur when gas and dust clouds collapse, forcing hydrogen atoms together in a gravitational vice. The result is supposed to be the formation of helium atoms and the release of energetic particles that can take 1,000,000 years to travel outward from the solar core. Acoustical waveguides then carry hot gas from inside the sun on a conveyor system that depends on convection and shock waves. The fact that kinetic energy dominates astronomical theories is illustrated by a recent press release from the National Astronomical Observatory of Japan, the Hinode spacecraft. In orbit around the sun, observed the strongest magnetic field ever directly measured on the surface of the sun. However, the bias toward mechanical action is obvious when they announce that the field is due to gas outflow from one sunspot pushing against another sunspot. Wait a minute, did it just say the Japanese are in a spacecraft? Oh, they have a probe. What are they doing? Buzzing around the solar system. Big red ball on the side. Yeah, same old. They're not allowed to think. They've got to know better. I mean, a lot of them probably, but they just play the game, but they don't get paid. Consensus schools of thought do not accept electric universe theory, viewing the sun as an anode, or positively charged terminal with an electric double layer isolating it from charged particles traveling through the galaxy, suggests that the sun experiences charge-discharge phenomena inside its heliosphere. Therefore, it is the sun's capacitive, resistive, and inductive aspects that drive its activity. Yes, indeed. Did you know that when you get an X-ray, that Inside that X-ray machine is nothing more than an anode and a cathode that's electrically driven, just like nuclear explosions. They short out the electrostatic field of the Earth. An electric sun means that electric discharges penetrate its photosphere, allowing electric charge to flow into its depths. It is electromagnetic flux tubes, rather than acoustical waveguides, that expose the sun's cooler interior. Those flux tubes connect the sun's electromagnetic environment with other nearby charged bodies, planets, moons, comets, etc. The electric fields in space accelerate charged solar particles, creating coherent electric networks that flow through the solar system. In an electric universe, celestial bodies are immersed in plasma and interact along circuits. Since the sun is electrically interconnected with the Milky Way, it should be thought of as a charged object seeking equilibrium with its environment. Since the balance is not stable, electric charge flowing into and out of the sun can sometimes cause tremendous bursts of energy called solar flares. A positive space charge sheath exists with respect to the interstellar medium, ISM, so sunspots and flares result from variations in electrical conditions. The sun appears to experience cyclic influences that point to an association with a fluctuating galactic circuit. The extent of that circuit is unknown, but probably involves thousands of cubic light years. The electricity moving through transmission lines is also not known. But consensus astronomers are constantly amazed by the power output from solar flares. Solar flares are most likely cosmic lightning bursts discharging vast quantities of matter at near relativistic speeds out into space. As mentioned, the circuit connecting the sun with the Milky Way probably extends for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of light years, giving some indication that the electrical energy feeding the solar anode must be substantial. The electric universe advocate Wal Thornhill wrote, "While enormous time and resources have been poured into the effort to understand stars based on a single outdated idea, those familiar with plasma discharge phenomena have been paying close attention to the observed phenomena on the sun and finding simple electrical explanation. After 100 years of neglect, an electrical model of stars is just beginning to emerge." Stephen Smith, with a hat tip to William Thompson. All right, well, we're coming up on 2 hours, so I'm just guessing. Actually, it's an hour and a half. We'll be coming up on 2 hours soon. I'm going to look for one more audio to play, and I'll play a couple songs in the meantime. Hang out with me. October 15th, 1997, NASA launched the 6-ton Cassini-Huygens spacecraft, the largest spacecraft mission ever deployed at the time. Its name was changed twice during the mission. The Cassini Equinox mission was a 2-year extension that began on July 1st, 2008. Then it was changed to the Cassini Solstice mission, named for the summer solstice on Saturn that took place on May 2017. Cassini burned up in Saturn's atmosphere. Cassini's mission uncovered many problems. Methane gas escapes from Titan's atmosphere, where sunlight changes it back into carbon and hydrogen. Titan is supposed to be billions of years old, so how has its methane atmosphere survived? It should have evaporated eons ago. Astrophysicists resolved that issue by imagining large lakes of liquid methane on the surface. The idea suffered a blow when Huygens lander touched down on a rocky plain. No methane rain was detected, and no methane puddles were seen. Instead, a vast dry expanse covered with sand dunes and dry river channels were seen. Huygens used a probe attached to its bottom with a pressure sensor programmed with a variety of materials. The mission team reported that the lander felt something moist, in parentheses, but the data also indicated dry sand. Methane drifted around the probe, but it quickly dissipated. presumably because of the lander's heat. According to a recent press release, planetary scientists analyzing Cassini's data archive found more anomalies. Titan, they speculate, has a weather cycle like Earth, except it involves methane instead of water. Evaporation clouds, rain, rivers, lakes, and seas are said to exist on Titan, despite its temperature of minus 220 Celsius. How those catchments were formed is a puzzle, since they do not fit well with computer models. Images transmitted from Titan's surface revealed a rocky landscape with the consistency of sand. A field of small pebbles extended to the horizon. Spectrographic analysis established that the rocks are made of water ice. It is easy to understand how ice can appear to be like a rock when it is at a temperature of minus 220 Celsius. Huygens did not find liquids of any kind. The press announcement stated that they saw small lakes from orbit that evaporated over time. However, what they did not see was those lakes refilling during Cassini's mission. The Cassini Equinox orbiter detected an infrared reflection from the area known as Kraken Mare, Monster Ocean is what that means, that covers more than 400,000 square kilometers in Titan's north polar region. Is Kraken Mare really a lake larger than Earth's Lake Superior? As noted in a previous picture of the day, the lakes on Titan are similar to the Mara of our own moon. Every bronchiated channel on Titan is dry. They all have dark, flat floors, with no evidence of flowing liquids. Coupled with the observation that Titan's Kraken Mare resembles Mare Serenitatis more than it does Lake Superior. The same rels are present on Titan as on the moon. Electric Universe advocate Wal Thornhill observed that images from Cassini October Celsius. Huygens did not find liquids of any kind. The press announcement stated that they saw small lakes from orbit that evaporated over time. However, what they did not see was those lakes refilling during Cassini's mission. The Cassini Equinox orbiter detected an infrared reflection from the area known as Kraken Mare, Monster Ocean is what that means, that covers more than 400,000 square kilometers in Titan's north polar region. Is Kraken Mare really a lake larger than Earth's Lake Superior? As noted in a previous picture of the day, the lakes on Titan are similar to the Mara of our own moon. Every bronchiated channel on Titan is dry. They all have dark, flat floors, with no evidence of flowing liquids. Coupled with the observation that Titan's Kraken Mare resembles Mare Serenitatis more than it does Lake Superior. The same rels are present on Titan as on the moon. Electric Universe advocate Wal Thornhill observed that images from Cassini are typical of arc machining of the surface. I would compare them directly to the scallop scarring on Jupiter's moon, Io, and the flat melted floor depressions that result. Such floors would be expected to give a dark radar return. The fact that lakes are also close by vast dune fields in the polar region suggests an electrical origin sometime in the past. It is in the southern and northern latitudes of Titan that they are found. Since electrical activity carved on the surface of other rocky bodies, why would it come as a surprise to find that it has also been at work on Titan? It is a distinct probability that the infrared light seen by Cassini was a reflection from hardened glass-like surfaces. Stephen Smith. The Electric Universe, the gift that keeps on giving.
Tennessee Valley Authority was created immediately after Roosevelt took office. First dams are all 1933 when Roosevelt first came in. They began construction. Wheeler Dam, Chickamauga, construction. We didn't have any money. We had nothing to do this with, and we did it. Operational, 1936. Beautiful turbine going in to make electricity with. Fontana Dam during the war, they stepped it up. Operational. Production of ammonium nitrate for fertilizer at TVA. So TVA projects were being studied from people from all over the world, sent engineers and politicians, and we sent experts and engineers to them. And this is Russia, China, Mexico, South America, India. And it started at the very beginning. This is you see the dates of these articles are at the bottom. In 1934, Brazil changed its constitution to reflect what TVA was doing, and because they were going to do similar things. Morris L. Cook was the director of the Rural Electrification Administration. He was an expert in applying electricity to lift the population from misery and create a modern workforce. In 1936, Franklin Roosevelt went to Argentina for a Pan-American conference. And there were mass crowds that were thrilled to see that power was being exerted by a benefactor of humanity. This was noted throughout the world. This shook the world at that time, because the United States had reversed the earlier 20th century policy with the good neighbor policy. Roosevelt met in Buenos Aires Getúlio Vargas, the president of Brazil. And Roosevelt refers to him as the second man who created the New Deal. In 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill met on a battleship, and they issued jointly what was called the Atlantic Charter. It had been drafted by Sumner Welles, and this is Sumner Welles' typed copy of the original of a draft with Franklin Roosevelt's corrections. Welles was FDR's policy chief at the State Department, not Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State. Certain common principles on which they based their hopes for a better future for the world. This was what we were fighting for, and this became the standard for all representatives of Franklin Roosevelt, and it was rejected by all of his opponents, domestic and abroad. That is, the real opponents. But this was the rallying point, the Atlantic Charter. They respect the right of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live, and they wish to see sovereign rights and self-government restored to those who have been forcibly deprived of them, and to bring about improved labor standards, economic advancement, and social security. British Empire leader Winston Churchill doesn't apply to our empire. He said this is in a speech in London in 1942. Let me make this clear in case there should be any mistake about it. I have not become the King's First Minister to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire, that society of nations and communities gathered in and around the ancient British monarchy. Sumner Welles, brought in Lawrence Duggan to run the Latin American desk of the State Department. And Welles and the Duggan family are old family friends of Franklin Roosevelt. This on the right is Lawrence Duggan, a very young man. The United States was issuing loans before we got in World War II to South American countries to establish industries, large loans. steel and electric railways for Brazil, hydroelectric projects. In 1942, Franklin Roosevelt brought Morris Cook, the man from the rural electrification administration, and said, go to Brazil.
Failed. According to Jacobson's records, he last saw the president in Florida as he was preparing for the November trip to Dallas. Max Jacobson's medical license was revoked in 1975 after one of his patients died from acute amphetamine. Brought tragedy to the president and his family.
It was in August of '63, and Jacqueline Kennedy went into labor and prematurely delivered the baby Patrick. I was assigned to escort the baby up to the Children's Hospital in Boston. And about 8 o'clock that night, the president arrived. And in the meantime, we had learned, of course, the baby was 4 pounds, 10 ounces and was in grave condition. And we got into the elevator. The doctor briefed the president on the condition of his son, which was not optimistic. And we got off on the ICU unit, and we passed a room where there were 2 delightful little girls, and one had severe burns up her throat. Her bib had caught on fire, and the other girl had a similar but separate incident with burns down her arm and huge pods on the end of her hands. And President Kennedy stopped, and he said, I'd like to write a note to the children. So the nurse scurries to the station and gets the name of the children, and Kennedy writes a note to each child. He just did this spontaneously. And he said, can you see they get this? And there was no fanfare, there was no photo op, there was no press release or anything. It was just a matter of empathy and concern for someone else. And then we proceeded down the hall to see his son, who, of course, died the next day. This was part of the dichotomy of the man. You could see so many qualities that just glowed that you couldn't see why he wanted to follow other roads that were so destructive. But after the death of Patrick, it was sort of like a metamorphosis in a sense that he was closer to her, and he saw him spend more time together.
I witnessed the autopsy, and his diagram shows that the wound to the back was lower than the wound to the throat.
Let's party.
Give us the girl or we'll take her.
Enough talk.
Well, that'll
had been at his home in West Palm Beach. People think Kennedy didn't know what was going on, or that he didn't know the Cubans, didn't know their aspirations. He certainly did. He knew before many others did. And then I brought him over to the Pentagon to meet with the Secretary of Defense at the time, who was Mr. Gates. But you see, people attribute to Kennedy a lack of knowledge of this, when really that's not accurate. And from this beginning, we finally got to the point where a brigade had been formed and trained and equipped to invade Cuba and at the Bay of Pigs. And the requirement, the absolutely essential requirement of that attack was that every Castro combat aircraft would be destroyed before the brigade landed at dawn on April 17th. Now, there were only 10 planes. It wasn't a big deal. On Saturday morning, the 15th, 7 of the 10 had been destroyed. But 3 jets, 3 we call T-birds, T-33s, had flown down to Santiago, Cuba, quite by chance, and our U-2s found them that afternoon. So on Monday morning, before dawn, 4 B-26s were ordered by President Kennedy himself to attack those jets and destroy them. Now, this is very crucial, because if those 3 planes were destroyed, there were no aircraft for Castro's Air Force. There would be no requirement for air cover and all these stories that have developed since then. The facts are that Kennedy, on that Sunday afternoon, when he approved the landings, with the proviso that there be this airstrike to destroy them. And that's the critical step in the Bay of Pigs understanding, that Kennedy did not withhold air cover or anything else. He followed the plan as it was drawn by a very able Marine colonel and approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to destroy all combat aircraft. And they weren't destroyed. That was the problem.
What happened? Why weren't they destroyed?
Well, this is a bit of history, and it's contentious, I'll admit. But this document is the document prepared by the Cuban Study Group. The Cuban Study Group was assigned by Kennedy the day after the surrender of the brigade in Cuba on the 22nd of April, 1961. The group was very interesting. If you ever could think of 4 different people trying to work together, it was Maxwell Taylor, the retired General Chief of Staff of the Army. It was Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA, but who was not in town at the time of the invasion of Cuba for some reason or other. Admiral Arleigh Burke, the head of the Navy, who had had more to do with the Bay of Pigs program than the chairman had, so Arleigh Burke was asked to be there. And then the real point of interest in the group, Bobby Kennedy.
Huh.
Now, they met, I think I made a note on this, yes, they met 2 doors from my office. The door in the room in the Pentagon is listed on the page there. They met 2 doors from my office for all their inquiries. Now, the reason I present this is a true copy of the report that Taylor gave to the President. And in this report, it states what the committee came up with as a reason for the failure of the program. And I'll just read it right out of here because I don't want anybody to differ with the way it should go. At about 9:30 p.m. on the 16th of April, Mr. McGeorge Bundy, Special Assistant to the President, telephoned General Cabell of the CIA to inform him that the dawn airstrikes the following morning should not be launched until they could be conducted from a strip within the beachhead. In other words, after they took the beachhead. Mr. Bundy indicated that any further consultation with regard to this matter should be with the Secretary of State. General Cabell, accompanied by Mr. Bissell of CIA, went at once to Secretary Rusk's office, arriving at about 10:15. Now, there's no sense of going further on that, but the entire thing is documented that the failure to fly that strike is why the thing failed. And back in the report further are the words of Dr. De Verona, who would have been the new president of Cuba had they won, and he said, "We would be in Havana today if those 3 jets had been destroyed." Now, anybody that writes otherwise is just misinformed. There are the official papers.
Now, let me ask you now. Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, is out of town. McGeorge Bundy, President Kennedy's national security advisor, countermands the military plan for the Bay of Pigs, and as the result of that countermanding, there's a fiasco instead of a victory. What kind of conclusion do you draw from this? Were there senior people in the Kennedy administration who were consciously out to sabotage this in order to somehow or other weaken the Kennedy presidency, or what? I mean, history generally attributes the failure to John Kennedy, not McGeorge Bundy. But what you're saying here is extraordinarily important.
Well, I think it is. I think it really is. But I think we should also put it in the time. Be very careful. Hindsight doesn't make a good historian. And the Kennedy administration was new in April of '60. They have been there just February and March.
Sure, yeah.
You know, fairly new. You could not expect that the civilian element of the administration would necessarily have a lot of military experience. And as the paper goes on to show, that some of the people who were briefed about the significance of destroying all the aircraft first didn't realize that 3 little jets up against a whole fleet of B-26s. We had armed the exiles with B-26s, but they're slower than the jets, see, so they couldn't fight them. They didn't think that it would make that much difference. And I'm willing to side with Admiral Burke and General Taylor in saying, as they do further on, that there were misunderstandings. They didn't understand the tactical problem. Well, we could leave it there. Some people would like to squeeze it up a little tighter and say that it was countermanding the president. I think that should be a matter of choice. What I'm interested in doing is presenting the record, and the record says the words I just read. They don't give a reason, but I'd like you to keep this in mind. Every day the questions were asked of the people in that room by this committee. Bobby Kennedy left immediately in the afternoon back to the White House to talk with his brother, the president. Had there been any doubt in his mind or in the president's mind that this report that Bundy did this on his own is right, they would have stopped immediately. They would have said, well, now wait a minute, Kennedy told Bundy to do this, or somebody else told him. But there was no one else seeing it. That's silent. So we have to be a little careful about that, but the record speaks for itself pretty clearly. It was a very bad blunder.
What happened as the result of that? Kennedy's presented with the Taylor report, the Taylor Cuban Study Group report. What does he do on the basis of that?
Very interesting step, because in this report is not only the requirement to study the failure, but Kennedy had decided that he was not going to rely on the CIA anymore, and that he was going to have an alternative system created for the operation of clandestine operations of the United States government. And in this report, there are the words that are written by the people in the committee and by General Taylor primarily that became one of the most important national security action memorandum ever published by Kennedy, and that's the highest document our government can publish, number 55, issued in July of 1961. And essentially it says that the President holds the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff responsible for advice to him in peacetime operations, meaning clandestine operations, as he would be in wartime. Now, right away, that meant that the JCS was going to be in charge of these things. Programs would be run by the JCS under the direction of the NSC, and the CIA would not be in clandestine operations. A powerful statement, translated by Senator Mansfield and Justice Douglas, both friends of Kennedy, that Kennedy was going to destroy the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Well, that's another way to say it. But what is actually said are the words that the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be responsible to the President for advice, and they would carry out. Then also in this report is a long section on what the alternative system would be when the CIA was not involved.
Of course, the events at the Bay of Pigs occur at a kind of a critical juncture in the whole development of the Vietnam engagement of the United States. As you point out throughout the book, the U.S. involvement in Indochina, what you refer to as a 30 Years' War, began in 1945. One of the things that was very striking to me was your description of a series of rather significant steps that were taken with U.S. involvement in Indochina, a large relocation of population, some rather significant measures that disrupted the traditional culture and economic infrastructure of the country. And what you more or less seem to be suggesting is that these blunders, these actions taken without a real appreciation of the culture of the area, had as much to do with creating the conditions of chaos and warfare in Vietnam as anything else. I'd like you to tell our listeners something about this, because, again, it's a rather unique vantage point view of what actually went wrong in Vietnam.
I mentioned earlier that we had armed and equipped Ho Chi Minh, which would surprise a lot of people now, but that's how it happened. And then we broke away from that and began to arm the French until the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. In 1954, there was an agreement in Geneva that the country would be separated at the 17th parallel into North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh and South Vietnam under a question mark for a little while, Bao Dai, the old king. But very shortly, under Ngo Dinh Diem, an exile Vietnamese brought in there by the United States and made president of Vietnam about June or July of '54. But of equal importance, in January and February of 1954, the subject of what to do in Vietnam had come up several times, and people should be familiar with the fact, and I very carefully cite this from records, that Eisenhower, in speaking to the National Security Council, said he would never, he bitterly opposed, the words he used, to the introduction of American troops into Vietnam. He would never approve that. In less than a month from that meeting, the Dulles brothers and others, Secretary of Defense and some others, were meeting on what was called the Vietnam Committee of the National Security Council. And they approved an idea that Mr. Allen Dulles came up with, the Director of Central Intelligence, to introduce just 5 men into Vietnam as more or less special advisors with the support forces there that were there to aid this, get the country started. You know, as a country that had no existence, it had to get started. And he called that unit the Saigon Military Mission, put it under the control of Colonel Lansdale in the Philippines and other men. One of the first things they did was to use the paragraph in the Geneva Agreements that, in all fairness, it appeared, said, any North Vietnamese who would rather be in the South is free to go, and any South Vietnamese who would rather be in the North is free to go. What the Saigon Military Mission did was go into North Vietnam, and through all kinds of acts, terrorism, propaganda, frightening the people and everything else, they managed unbelievably to cause 1,100,000 of those North Vietnamese to move to South Vietnam. Now, it wasn't all done quite that simple. The U.S. Navy transports carried 660,000 on U.S. Navy vessels. In my book, I have photographs of the operation, just so people will know it really took place. CIA's aircraft, the Civil Air Transport Airline, which is a proprietary airline of CIA, carried between 300,000 and 400,000. Now, there's only one port in South Vietnam. That's at Saigon. So they have to go down the coast and up the river to Saigon and then turn these 1 million people loose. Now, can you just picture what would happen if 1 million people from New York were all of a sudden taken to Kansas City and just dumped loose? No money, no home, no food, no automobile, no TV, no nothing. You know, what are you going to do with them? Well, that's what happened in Vietnam. These people became rioters. They were, trying to get food. They didn't have drinking water. You can be up to your knees all day in a rice paddy, but you can't drink that water, and so on. A terrible situation came up, such that you'll remember the days when the fighting in Vietnam took place south of Saigon, not up in the north. If the Canadians were going to fight this country, would we expect the war to take place in Florida? Well, that's what was going on. This was a make-war deal, going back to the Malthusian theory that, well, these poor folks aren't going to make it anyway, so if we kill off that 1 million or 1.5 million or 4 million, as was more likely the number, so what? And that kind of thinking took place in that country. And the wartime fodder, the people that get shot at and chased around, to a great degree, were these 1 million. Now, in the 1 million, there were many fifth columnists put there very alertly by Ho Chi Minh and his forces. That exacerbated the problem. So when Vietnam came into being with that kind of a problem, and what do you do when you create a country today and you expect it to defend itself tomorrow? No army, no police, no tax.